Good morning, everybody. Welcome to We Can Be Zeros, first Facebook Live event. This morning, I will be chatting to a local Melbourne resident, a friend of mine, David Loving. David Loving emigrated or left Ireland for Australia back in 2002 and has been over in Australia ever since. And so this morning, we're going to have a chat about life in Australia just before the pandemic started, and what it was like in lockdown, and what things have been like now since he's come out of lockdown. So David will be just joining us in a moment. Okay. Well, everyone, I'd like to welcome Dave Loving to We Can Be Zero's first live broadcast. So welcome, Dave. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Nighttime now. Just about everyone in the house has gone to bed already.
Very good, very good. So it's just coming up to just gone 10 o'clock in Melbourne there. So look, we're going to have a conversation today. We're going to have a discussion about, I suppose, what life was like in Australia just before the pandemic struck. And I suppose, Dave, in terms of an introduction, I was saying to anyone who's watching this today that you had left Ireland for Australia back in 2002, 2003. Initially, I don't think you had planned on being over there for as long as you have been. Long story short, you met the woman of your dreams. You've settled over there now in Melbourne. And I suppose right up until I think last year you had plans to come home. Did you have plans to come home last year before the pandemic struck?
Yeah. So we actually had flights booked, and we were due to come home around mid-March last year.
Okay.
And a lot of things were going on as we had our own things going on and with our own life, and then obviously the pandemic was adding to that as well. And right up until about a month before, we were due to leave, we had to make a call, and it quickly was spiraling. The pandemic was becoming a reality, and we had to make a call, and we couldn't go. It was a potential that we would get there and not be able to come back to Melbourne again. So the risk was too great. So it was very late in the piece that we cancelled that trip, and we're still waiting to
come back,
be able to book and go back.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to get back sooner rather than later. So look, tell me a little bit about, because I know we were discussing before we were going to have a chat today about, we were chatting about your lockdown over in Melbourne, and I know you're out of lockdown now. And if I'd like to just ask you, maybe, how long have you guys been out of lockdown in Melbourne? And I know you've had a couple of lockdowns since. I know you've had a couple of lockdowns since the big one, if you want to call it the big one. So if you just tell us a little bit about, I suppose, how long you've been out of lockdown, and we'll move from there.
Yeah. So it was a bit of a gradual process coming out of lockdown. So you could say we started coming out sort of around October was the turning point, I think, when things like playgrounds, you could go back to some playgrounds, and you could go outside the 5-kilometer limit, and some of those sorts of restrictions. And as we got closer to November, December, most all of the heavy restrictions had started to ease a lot by that stage. So yeah, since about say November at least, it's been COVID normal, relatively normal.
Wow. So since November time, you've been kind of getting back to, I suppose, you can go to a restaurant, have a nice meal, maybe, I don't know, go to a pub, or and I suppose, things that we've been hearing a lot about this in the media on our side, and a lot of people are really jealous, about the I suppose just those normal day-to-day things that we all took for granted. Just the joy of being able to, and it is the absolute joy now of being able to say, right, we'll book a table in our favorite restaurant for Saturday night. So you guys can do that, whereas we're still in lockdown.
Yeah, so I guess one of the main turning points was my wife's birthday in mid-November. I literally restaurants were opening, and some weren't even open, and I had to book something. And everyone and their dog wants to book, at this stage, because no one's been to a restaurant in that long. So I had to get onto it quickly. So not even all the restaurants were available at the beginning of November, but certainly by mid-November, a lot of them were. And I do recall, essentially booking the first best restaurant that I could, and us booking an Uber into the city. We just had to wear our masks in the taxi, essentially, or in the Uber, and you still do now. If you want to catch an Uber, public transport, trains, and that sort of thing, you still would wear a mask.
Yes.
And we went into the city for the first time in I don't know how long, and it was an interesting experience. It was strange in a way, but there was plenty of people out, and plenty of people on the streets, plenty of people in bars and restaurants and things like that. And yeah, it did feel a lot more normal. That's from that point, and certainly since then, even I think even more restrictions, shall we say, have been eased, and to a point now where because we've no community transmissions, you'd be hard pressed to push, what those limits are. You can have 30 people in your house. I never have 30 people in my house, but the questions are like, if I have a wedding in my house, can I have one? And they're like, okay, you can have 30 people. That's it, no more. And there was a point during our lockdown where I had to go to a funeral, and only 20 physical people could go to this funeral, and that's a tough situation to be in. And today, this is more about the space that you fill. So I think there's a 2 meter square, shall we say, per person. So there's no number limit as such, but if you have it indoors or outdoors is a lot better, because you can fit a lot more people.
Yeah.
But that's a general rule I've seen across the board, that you don't really pay much attention to it yourself anymore. You just go to these places, and they set it up so that they are meeting the requirements. They're not overcrowding. They have enough space between people.
Okay.
If you do go to a restaurant. So it's a big difference to when I was trying to book this restaurant in November. Now we just a lot of it is still, you still try and book, essentially, so that they don't hit their limit, because you could turn up to a place and not be able to get in. But if you book, you're in. You're going out. You're doing the stuff that you normally do.
Fantastic. And that's again, all those little things that I suppose we took for granted before the pandemic, or maybe not take for granted, but it was just, you could always book a restaurant. You could always go to a pub. You could always could walk into a pub. But now, I suppose, we don't have that here in Ireland. I suppose this is our third lockdown, and even as late as last night in the media reports, they're saying that it's unlikely restrictions are going to be lifted until June. Okay, so come June, we'll have endured the longest lockdown in the world. Well, I would say
Wow.
not the longest lockdown in the world, but I suppose in terms of 3 lockdowns, our first lockdown, our first lockdown was March last year, and then it was tweaked a little bit where it became quite very strict. But we got the case numbers down in by July the 2nd, I think, and the 3rd, we had the case numbers down to I think 2 cases a day, really really low cases, and there was a lot of pressure to open up bars and restaurants and things like that for the summer. And of course, we all wanted it to open up, but the difference between Australia and Melbourne, maybe, that I would put to you is, if you're going to open up, you have to have your local public health teams resourced so that if there is an outbreak, they can get out into the community and really, really suppress that outbreak so that it doesn't become a problem for wider society. And and I think you've experienced that, where early on this year there might have been a 5-day lockdown, which I suppose, for us here in Ireland, it's like a 5-day lockdown. That wouldn't be a problem. This is our 3rd lockdown. We're Ireland Irish people now we've been in a lockdown gym. We're pumping the weights during lockdown. So you throw a lockdown at us, we're like, oh yeah, but we want to get out of this lockdown. We want to get back to a point where we can book a restaurant, where our kids are in school and we're not concerned that they're going to be out of school again. So look, with that in mind, that brings me on to I suppose just something else I wanted to maybe put to you. So tell me a little bit about, you touched on mask wearing and so on and so forth, but tell me a little bit about day to day. I know you still have to wear masks and things like that, but tell me a little bit about, is there a requirement to be very conscious about your social distancing?
Yeah, so okay, every one of my pants, I've got a mask in the pocket.
Very good.
So the idea is that you don't need it until maybe you're in a situation that you realize that you can't social distance. So you're supposed to have one handy. You're supposed to have one ready, and we're in a situation now where if you're outdoors, you don't need to wear it, generally speaking. If you go to a supermarket, you have to wear it, like a mall or like a shopping center type situation, you'd have to wear it in there. But outside of that, you're usually in a situation where you can be contact traced quite easily. So every restaurant you go to, you're logging in and saying that you've been there, so you don't have to wear a mask. Same goes for a lot of other places. So you're kind of contact tracing as you go, and you're telling people that you're there. So if you've told people you're there and they're aware that you've been there, then the mask isn't as necessary. So
Very good.
yeah, that's how we're currently are. That's what our zero community transmissions for some time now, at
Yeah.
least a month or whatever it is. But you know especially in Melbourne, I think we're all a bit you don't want to feel too comfortable. We're all waiting for the next outbreak or potential outbreak, because it's happened before, and
Yeah.
essentially you don't want to go back to it. So people are very conscious of that, and you'll see that a lot of people go for tests as well. So everyone's constantly going for tests. You get a
So
cold, you get a sniffle,
yeah.
you're always going for tests. And
So it sounds like
17,000 tests a day might get done, but
yeah.
you get zero, you still get zero cases, or one case, or whatever it
But
is.
so it sounds like that. It sounds like everyone is there's almost like a collective effort here where everyone knows they have a part to play. And but moving on from that, tell me, I suppose some people say it's not possible for us to do what maybe Melbourne in Australia and Victoria have done in Australia, because Irish people don't have the mentality or the discipline to do this. Having lived in Ireland and Australia, what do you think?
That's a tough question to put on me. I guess, honestly, if there's anywhere in the world that's has a similar attitude or mentality to life, it is Australia. They have a lot of the same habits, and everyone likes to go out for a drink and
Yes,
and socialize.
of
Just
course.
as much as anywhere else. It's no different in that regard. It's not like people are super disciplined here. You always have the fringe elements that will protest as well, to a degree. But there's the majority of people have common sense, and they make an effort,
Yeah.
and
Do you
it's a
think
collective effort.
do you think that maybe, I suppose, one of the areas that I would kind of think about would be, if I think we can do it, and in fact we've proven we can do it, because last July we had really suppressed the cases. So we've proven we can do it. Um, of course, it gets harder the more, as rolling lockdowns and repeated lockdowns, people get tired and people get weary. But if we have a goal, if we have a goal to work towards, um, and a tangible goal, and where government puts in place the measures to deal with outbreaks when and if they occur, once society has been reopened. um, I don't know what you think, but I think definitely I think we can do this. And some people say as well, oh, some people start from the when it's discussed about adopting a zero COVID strategy in Ireland. Lots of people in Ireland, the first thing you hear is, oh, it's impossible to get to zero. But it's not about getting to zero. It's about having zero mystery cases. So it's about having the cases so low that when an outbreak occurs, it's easy for public health teams to track and trace and deal with the outbreaks and suppress them. Um, so look,
Yeah, look, you did make a good point. Yeah, so one of the points you raise is having a goal. And when we started our lockdown, the really hard lockdown in July, we started it with potentially no kind of end in sight, or especially in March when we first started at the beginning, it felt like this could go on forever, in March, and that's a bleak outlook. That's something that you don't want to be staring, down the barrel at. But if there's a realistic endpoint to it, then you can kind of work to that.
yes,
And that's we had, I think that was probably the difference between, and it's hard to think back, but it's probably the difference between the initial lockdown where everyone in Australia essentially had to do it. And we didn't know when, we were, going to be able to change things, compared to the second time around when we had a goal. We had, like a certain amount of cases, that we had to reach within a certain amount of time. We had a rough estimate as to when that would happen. I think we got there earlier, maybe by a couple of weeks, and that gives you hope. But
yes,
no doubt, isolation and lockdowns, they are tough to go through,
they are.
for anyone, mentally and financially, for individuals and for businesses and whatnot. But um, yeah, you need to have that end goal. And if the result is, that you get to live a more normal life and that things get to open up, that's something to work towards. I think anyone potentially, with that sort of carrot in front of you, you can work towards that.
Yeah, and I suppose, again, we spoke about the big lockdown in Australia, and we spoke before today how tough it was, and how hard it was. And but knowing what you know now, and knowing your life today and your family life and everything, were the sacrifices worth it to get to where you were today?
No doubt. We're in a position where life is relatively normal, so you can't complain about that.
Mm.
There are always, downsides. We'd love to travel to Ireland. We'd love to travel overseas. There's no one coming in here. There's no one leaving this
Yes,
island continent. It's still an island. It's just a
yes,
very big one. Um, and ultimately, yeah, there's no doubt, and you're looking forward to the time when things can be even more normal. But
Yes.
yeah, look, even the rest of Australia, to a degree, state by state, they've all had their different experiences. But having to live in Melbourne through that panic when it was going out of control, and getting it under control, ultimately, seeing that happen, I think there was a lot of relief.
Yeah.
And it's still there. There's still, people are still as vigilant as you can be in a lot of cases. I'm sure there's plenty of situations where people are just throwing everything, caution to the wind, and
Yeah.
hoping for the best. But it only becomes a problem when you have cases in the community, and then it can go out of control, right? So
Yeah, but and would it be fair to say though, from an outsider looking in, it does look, it looks pretty impressive when there is an outbreak. In terms of, you would hear the reports, Melbourne is going into lockdown for 5 days.
yeah, short circuit, they call it.
Yeah,
There's a
and
lot of talk.
and
Yeah,
that's what you call a circuit breaker. That's what
a
you call
circuit
a
breaker.
circuit
Yeah,
breaker. I mean, a short, sharp lockdown, a circuit breaker as well. But part of the circuit breaker, it isn't just people staying at home on its own. It's the full mechanics of the state. Um, your public health teams, everything, a bit like the fire brigade, they swoop in on the area and they just put that fire out before it gets out of control.
that's right. Because like you say, it's manageable, right? If you can see this, if you can see it, if it's not like everywhere, you can focus on it.
Absolutely.
And,
And
and that's something, yeah, that they work towards.
okay, well, yeah, we're. I think, I don't know. I think we're more jealous over here now after this conversation today. But look, this has been a great conversation. The last thing I want to maybe put to you, or say to you, would be, again, when we hear or discuss about zero COVID strategies in Ireland, people start at the first thing that a lot of people say is they focus on what we can't do. And the first thing that comes up is, oh, we have a border with Northern Ireland. It's pointless trying zero COVID. Whereas um, the point that we would say is, and even what I would say from time to time is, start at what you can do, you know, and work a way up. And even hypothetically, there is a strategy for dealing with the border, and of course Victoria has a border with the rest of Australia, and Victoria was able to deal with that. But even if you, hypothetically speaking, cannot deal with the border,
Let me
that
stop you there. There's even
go
there, like we had to lock down around Melbourne. There was a ring of steel, they called it. There's no technical border around Melbourne, but that was locked in its own little border
right.
itself.
Yes.
So that's what happened during the real hard lockdown. It wasn't even a state border at that stage. We weren't even allowed to contaminate regional towns. Regional towns ostracized Melbourne in a lot of ways as well. So
Mm,
yeah, that's how far they went. They literally
yes.
stopped roads, people from exiting. You weren't able to. You have to have a very good reason if you were traveling outside of that, and that was not a state border by any stretch.
Okay. And I suppose, but well, getting back to my point anyway, is even though we talk about the border, I think there's a trauma element to the border in Northern Ireland because of the
Hmm.
troubles in Northern
Yeah.
Ireland, and I nearly think that element of trauma would would need to be dealt with, of course, and for very sensitive and for very justified reasons. But I suppose my last point would be, again, getting back to, even if we can't deal with the border, even if you could get 70% or 80% of the zero COVID framework in place, that's better than what we have now. Because what we have
Hmm.
now is rolling lockdowns. We have no end goal. Our vaccine rollout is delayed. Our government are relying on vaccines. So currently, it's a bit of a mess, but there is hope. And the hope is that um, our government see sense, because there is a growing list of countries that have adopted a zero COVID strategy, which is essentially an aggressive suppression strategy where you get the numbers down so low, your public health teams can manage the local outbreaks and deal with them and put them out, and you can get back to a normal life, but well, as reasonable a normal life as you can. I suppose. Listen, we're gonna wrap it up for today. It's lovely to speak to you, David, and thank you so much thank you for joining us today on our first Facebook Live on We Can Be Zero. One last thing before I go, if you had a message for the Irish government in terms of a zero COVID strategy, what would it be?
Well, I guess, you're either in lockdown or you're not, right? So, would you say you're in lockdown, or are you not in lockdown?
We're in lockdown, but there's a lot of half measures there. I mean, and this is the final point. I mean, we had 500 cases yesterday, and our schools are opened.
I mean, recently, what's the comparison? We had 6 days. At one point, we had 6 days of 0 cases, and then they were like, okay, cool, it's time to open the schools.
Okay.
It seems to be a bit of
half measures
there.
Half measures.
Half measures. Yeah.
It's a bit half measures. Look, listen, David, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much. I know it's late over there in Australia. Again, thank you so much for joining our first Facebook Live here, and We Can Be Zero. If anyone has any questions, pop them in the comments below. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. But listen, enjoy the rest of your weekend, David, and we'll be over here jealous, imagining you guys in restaurants and pubs and having these great parties, and we're out in our back gardens. But we'll do the best that we can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Over and
Thanks,
out.
mate.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.